the way that I guess I would sort of look at being a writer, especially now, is you're a bit like a magician in the sense that your entire job is to make people suspend their disbelief. So in that way, you only give them enough to keep their attention hanging. But if you give them too much, they already don't care because they already think that they know how the trick works. So you've lost them. So the goal is always to keep them guessing just enough to get them to get to the next part. And then as you expose more, their feeling becomes one of like, oh, I've made this understanding myself. Like, this is how I understand
I've
it.
connected the dots.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's the rewarding part of reading a book.
What is the purpose of storytelling for you as a writer?
I mean, I think like this kind of actually ties into what we're going to talk about later on, but I think that all storytelling broadly has kind of been this sort of innate human need to give some kind of mechanics to the idea of like free will and determinism. In the sense that, especially like if we were to assume that, say, for example, humans probably since the dawn of consciousness have been inventing some kind of stories for why we're here or what's going on. There was even I watched a video recently, I don't know if it was like a study or something, but it was based on how humans used to sleep in sort of batches of like 4 hours and then they'd be awake for a couple and then go back to sleep for a couple more hours. During the time that they'd be awake in the intervals between sleep, they would sit typically around a fire if that sort of technology had been discovered by then, and discuss like stories, do like sort of the tribe politics during that time, whatever was going on, but usually it would be probably predominantly storytelling. I think that we really haven't changed at all since that first kind of time period, in the sense that all stories are free will and determinism. Even say take like, for example, Greeks or like the Epic of Gilgamesh as an example of that. It's about a guy who wants to exhibit free will against, for the purposes of that story, death and the idea and his fear of dying. So he goes on this journey for knowledge, or in his case, to find immortality, which is, knowledge can be anything. It can be like, say, a thing or a concept or a person or whatever you need. And then it's the return from that journey. So in that sense, it raises a question, obviously, of like free will and determinism, because obviously for the purposes of the story, the character believes they are free. They're making these decisions by their own choice. Or maybe for them, it is that fight for like, I've been told to do this, but I actually want to do this. And then, that sort of kind of impetus between free will and determinism in the story kind of takes place in whenever they're on their return from the journey, is when the new self, the one with knowledge, has to encounter the old self, and there needs to be some kind of a synthesis between those two. And then that is broadly what makes up every single story ever told. It's even present in something like Jaws, say, which obviously is a movie, but whatever. It's about a guy who obviously discovers there is this shark killing people, but also the shark is just a stand-in for the real monster in that film, which is capitalism.
I don't know if that's a hot take, or I think that's genuinely...
That's just a take. I think it's like broadly, because it is also the fact that the mayor doesn't want, the tourism for the town because it's summer to decline, so he doesn't tell people about the shark and he plays it down.
Of course.
And then more people continue to die.
Yeah. Let's go back to a little bit, because I think you said some really important stuff there that I want to unpack. Yeah. First off, you mentioned about how like we use storytelling as a way to kind of understand reality almost. Where do you think that started from? You obviously mentioned it all the way back to the Epic of Gilgamesh and like why they did that. But when we do that, just like put myself back in those days as a human being, when we kind of like try to like understand ourselves through stories, what do you think that does for us?
Well, I think that like, we have a desperate need to feel like, I suppose, if you imagine your life as a car, that you're the one actually driving it. Which makes sense. Like, I suppose that is where the free will kind of comes into it. And people who don't believe in free will and instead say believe in determinism, which, just for the sake of clarity, is just basically, free will is not real and determinism is just like, I suppose, destiny.
Yes. The fact that we've had this conversation a million times, and we will have this conversation again.
Funny, but dream is destiny seems to be everywhere.
Dream is destiny indeed.
But like that's just like even the phrase dream is destiny is just repackaging free will and determinism. Destiny is determinism and free will is dream. In that way, like we've always kind of sought this need. I think maybe it is just perhaps a byproduct of being conscious beings. That we need to feel that we have agency over our lives, the directions of them, the consequences of our actions, all these things.
Let's unpack that then. Sorry, don't interrupt. The conscious part. I think you're onto something there. I saw this kind of like this post about, I can't remember, was it Richard Dawkins or someone? He was talking to an AI, I think Claude, and he was asking the AI, "Are you conscious?"
Yeah.
And the AI kind of gave this this answer, which I think is fascinating. He basically said, "I am not conscious in the way human beings are conscious. Human beings understand consciousness from moment to moment. The fact that they can understand the past and the future and the present. But the way Claude was explaining how they think, or it thinks, is that it kind of looks at it as a map. Yeah. The map is already there. That is a neural network. It's already there. And when it's been directed to certain stuff, it will go different parts of the map. So the map exists already. That is consciousness. And it kind of moves in between that. And it was kind of comparing that to human beings where we kind of go through the map on a sequential moment-to-moment basis. And that makes it, I think, that is how we reflect ourselves in stories, which I think is so fascinating, that the story has to have a beginning, in the middle, and the end. And to move through that process is how we begin to understand our reality and our kind of experience. And I think the fact that it's built like that is not, it's a feature and not a bug. It's part of how we kind of came to being. And it's part of how consciousness came for us to even to understand ourselves,
Yeah. Well, I think like when it comes to the AI side of things particularly, like that is determinism in practice. AI quite literally cannot think for itself, not in the same way that we do at least. It has to be directed, which means that it has no free will at the outset, because we can tell it to think it has free will, but that's determinism.
How different are we?
Well, that's, I suppose, the question that we've always kind of struggled with, isn't it? Even with stories, right? Like, obviously, we want to write our own stories and things like that. But even when we are making characters who, try and exhibit free will or whatever over their lives, well, their lives are already a set path decided by us. So there was never any free will in the first place. In that way, I think, if you want to look at sort of the span of a human life as like has a beginning, a middle, and an end, just like a story, well, that's determinism at play again, because the ending was already decided the second you got here. You're going to die one day, and that will be the end of your story.
And I think it's also kind of like a feature of like all these random events are being put into a coherent story about our mind. So all these things that kind of happen to us, happen to everybody around us. There's so many things that's happening right now on your way to even to this place right now. Around you, so many chaos, but you don't actually process it. They're all not part of your story, not part of your coherent story, So it's like, even the aspect of beginning, middle, and end is something that we conjure up because of how we kind of understand reality. To actually link that back to the story, you told me about a book, Into the Woods, and how it kind of unpacks storytelling. Could you talk to me about what you've learned from that book about storytelling?
Yeah. I guess just to begin, like, obviously stories have kind of always functioned in, this is not like necessarily a rule for every single story. People who kind of played with the craft a lot, but typically it will follow a like 3 or 5 act structure. But even in a 5-act structure, it still functionally is the same thing. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and an end. And at the beginning, you're one way, or you have a character who is one way. And at the end of the first act, or first 2 acts, they are then met with, whatever it might be. Like, reality, obviously, is not what it seems. And then Act 2 is kind of that new self taking over the character. And then Act 3 is like, at the peak of Act 2 would be like the conflict between the old and the new self, and then Act 3 would be the conclusion of that. Do they manage to synthesize whatever it is about themselves that they've learned or the knowledge that they've gained, or do they not? But then that's obviously a more kind of subversive approach to things. So that's when you get more into like, I guess, like the dark hero kind of story, like Berserk, say. Or I mean, even Vinland Saga, I suppose. Or like whatever else, Walter White from Breaking Bad is a good example of that as well, where like he starts one way and then his life is altered because of this new knowledge he gains. His life is immediately altered because of the fact that he knows he has cancer. He then, if you want to take the free will kind of account to it, chooses to then become a criminal, only to discover that actually he certainly had that in him before. And this kind of just allowed him, in that kind of dark hero trope, to tap into that darker side of his personality that allowed his true self, the Heisenberg self, to kind of flourish from the Walter White that had to die. And I mean, in that way, like, stories have always been exactly the same. Every single story more or less follows those kind of same beats.
As a writer, how do you understand storytelling when it comes to making stories yourself? The reason I asked that question is that obviously as you live your life, you begin to see the patterns of your life and how it kind of mimics, that kind of structure, the 5-act structure. Do you kind of use that as a kind of like a template when you come to writing your characters, as in like the turns and emotional turns, what happens here, how it affects, how it spreads out? How do you understand storytelling, like relating to your own kind of stories?
I think for me, like, because I wasn't really necessarily, I would say, fully aware per se of like, the kind of way that I guess a story flows, in the act structure or whatever you want to call it. I never really had an explicit awareness of that before I kind of, well, really since I started my PhD, which is probably not great to say as an English literature student. But it just always made sense to me that, like, you have a character, they want something. The entire story stems from the fact that they cannot immediately have that thing. That is the kind of, the generating event for the story and the arc that it takes. And, if it's like a villain story, say, and your main character happens to be a villain, which is becoming more popular, especially in like popular media, it's almost like where it ends. So you have to work backwards to kind of work out, like, how do I justify this to the audience? But one thing that I think a lot of people get lost in is that, like, just because you're writing a character, it doesn't mean that you have to write a character that the audience necessarily agrees with or even likes. Obviously, it helps if they do, but what you want more is to kind of just leave an impression. Like, you're supposed to, in multiple novels, stories, whatever, when you see a main character or a character doing something and you're like, are you dumb? Like, why would you do that? That's on purpose. It's because you want them to act a certain way. And the subversion of that is that they do the complete opposite of what you want. Because that's, I suppose if you want to look at it that way, their free will. You didn't write the story. But when you are the one writing the story, I find that it is also effective, because especially with me, like, I'm currently working on a story where, for example, at least with the main characters, I don't agree with a lot of the things that they do. And like, I can understand why, based on what I've created, they would act these certain ways. But I can see at the outset, because I already know where it's going, it is entirely to their own detriment. But I think that just makes it more compelling. It's that thing of like, how deep are you going to dig your heels into something until you finally accept, maybe I was wrong. But that self-acceptance can't come too early, because otherwise you've wasted, their entire chance to really develop.
Why is that compelling for you as a writer?
Because I think people are supposed to act in ways that you wouldn't necessarily want them to. I mean, at the end of the day, nobody lives in your head except you. I don't even act the way that I want myself to most of the time. But I also think, like, at the very least, when it comes to, your actual life, like, not acting the way that you even say I'm sure we've all thought this, but that feeling of like, no, I'm actually acting wrong, for example, right now, or whatever, you know, wherever you are. That is really just your, I guess, your old self, if you want to look at it that way, coming into conflict with your new self. You know, whatever knowledge you've gained, whatever life it is that you live now, the habits of your past can't follow through because otherwise it feels wrong. And if you manage to overcome that, I mean, that is basically character development 101. Or if it's like this fatal flaw, for example, in yourself, or you perceive it as one, it can obviously be a lot harder. Like, it could be as simple as changing habits. I mean, you know, for me, obviously, I've moved cities recently. And a lot of the habits that I had in London didn't make that move with me. And I think definitely for the best. You know, I feel like I've kind of outgrown whatever it was I was doing when I was down here. But the stuff that stayed, it's because it needed to stay.
And stuff like that, does it help you when you reflect on the characters? When it comes to just like them, for example, changing environments, do you go like, oh, I remember how I felt when I changed environment. It wasn't just a quick change.
Yeah.
It was a slow, gradual thing. I have to reflect this in the character that I write. Is that how you kind of understand it?
Pretty much, yeah. And like, I guess also for at least some of the characters that I'm trying to write, it is also the struggle to let go of the things that they want to retain. You know, I mean, obviously, like, say with, because obviously, you know, any story is dramatized. So typically a lot of stories will focus on something that's quite easy to grip onto. Like, for example, revenge. You know, revenge is one of those things, like, obviously you can justify it however you want, but there is the obvious, you know, human moral response of like, well, killing people isn't good, is it? And that's a completely rational take. But when that idea of revenge is what you're clinging to just to function at all, how can you expect somebody to let go of that so willingly? And then therein lies, like, I guess the character arc for whoever you want to make is like, do they need to let go of the revenge? Do they actually need to get the revenge to let go of it in the first place? You know, all of these things, like that really all, like any story, any character arc is entirely based on just there is some kind of a conflict of interest. Like what you need is not what you want. What you want isn't necessarily what you need. And the story from there would just be, and any story is that way as well. It's just the sort of like synthesis between like want and need and acceptance of what you need or want.
I find that really fascinating too, like how we understand stories and how we kind of look at them, because I feel like nowadays it's kind of looked at as just entertainment, but I think the core of stories, as we were talking about, were kind of like things that we understood about human beings so we can apply to our own life and actually grow, which is why the structures are done in a certain type of way. A question I have for you is that, do you truly believe stories can change people?
Definitely, yeah.
How so?
100%. Well, I mean, it could actually be something as simple as just, oh, I'd never thought about it that way. You know, obviously any good character is relatable. And I think like where you can see yourself in someone, and in particular a character who you may notice yourself in, but then they continue to act in ways that you don't like. Why don't you like that? Is it because, you know, like in the one hand you see yourself, like for example with me, right, one that I very much would have related to in the past as a child would have been like, I can't remember their name now, so it doesn't matter, but just like the whole character arc stemmed from like, I would see myself, you know, somebody who maybe is shy, for example, or can't find the words necessarily to communicate what they're in, what they're going through. And then even when given the chance, they still don't. You know, I feel like that's something that most people can relate to. Like we've all kind of been there, where even when you're given the opportunity to really explain yourself or ask for the help you might need, in that moment you may not have. And really it was only to your own detriment. But I think that in a way you can also utilize that, or at least I tried to, in the sense that I realized I had to ask for help from people. You know, it can be whatever, but it's hard to definitely like like when you see it played out in a story, obviously this is a fictionalized setting and your real life has unfortunately very real implications for what you do. But being able to kind of just let yourself, I suppose, let go is kind of the key there. Like, because then you're able to kind of just allow yourself to really develop more. You won't change if you don't give yourself the room to do so. But equally, you have to be the one to initiate the change.
Absolutely.
Like, either life happens to you or you happen to it. But one of those things will always be true.
Absolutely. I wanted to understand what it's like to be a writer, because yes, we've taken time to actually understand storytelling, and I think it's important for people to see how storytelling relates to people. But like, as a writer yourself, even if you understand all this, it doesn't help you for your life. I think most people, yes, you have the information and understanding, but it doesn't stop life being life. I think one of the ways that I struggle too when I become as a writer is that sometimes I lose the inspiration. I think losing inspiration as a writer is very difficult, because this is something that you hold dear to. It's your identity, and it's a way sometimes you even express yourself. If I don't express myself through writing, then I'm not expressing. There's words that aren't being said to myself even. How do you deal with those times when it becomes difficult to find the right words?
I mean, I think as a writer, you're kind of, unfortunately, the struggle of your life is finding the right words. Even if I had like 150 books published and I was like a billionaire, I would still hyperfixate on the fact that I did not phrase it the way I want to phrase it now. That's kind of what makes being a writer annoying, because you get very lost in, like, I guess, semantics of it all. I mean, when it comes to losing inspiration, for example, or like, I guess, struggling to find the right words, because that quite literally can cause you to lose inspiration, because you're just looking at it and going, no, this isn't it.
This is what I want to say, yeah.
Yeah. Like, even me, for example, right? Like, I'm obviously doing my PhD. And I got halfway into writing a novel, and then now I'm in the process of redrafting that entire half. I still have yet to even write the second half. But it does help having... One thing I've really had to kind of just accept about the process of writing is that it's absolutely not going to be perfect, and it definitely isn't going to be perfect on your first try, so don't even bother. But what I mean by that is more like, write it anyway, even though you know for a fact it is not what you want it to be, even if you're super uninspired. As long as you have the, I guess, like, skeletal framework of what it is you're trying to get across, in the chapters or in the arcs, or, whatever, your 3-act structure. Having a direction is super important, because then, you're not going to derail yourself. And even if it's not what you want it to be, it's better to have a rough outline of what you think it's going to be, because then if you think of something better, that's because you took the time to actually write it down in the rough first. Like, especially with something that, like, I'm doing, which deals quite often with, like, fight scenes and things like that. It's obviously balancing dialogue with fight scenes, with exposition, and then description as well, because I have a really annoying tendency to massively over describe. But I think I do that reflexively, because I feel the need to make it super clear to myself what exactly I'm picturing here. And it's fine to do that, I think, in rough drafting, because eventually you will whittle it away, and whatever you were actually trying to say will kind of expose itself. But at least if it's there, you can read it and reread it over and over and over again.
Is there a process you have for yourself then when it comes to that kind of, when you find yourself in that difficulty?
Well, I mean, I spent nearly 5 years planning. And, like, by the time that I sat down to even begin, I'd already had, like, in my head, I'd had, like, an entire series drummed up. And I found that, ironically, actually, that really tripped me up in beginning at all. Because, especially with what I want it to be about, it's like every single time I start any chapter, it's like I have all of this, but I can only show, like, all of that. but that is the most important part. Like everything else doesn't matter if I can't even get this much across properly.
But it feels like that is what informs this.
It does, of course.
So it also matters, no?
But the reader doesn't need to know all of that.
That's true.
They only need to know what you need them to know. Like, but that's actually what makes it fun for me, is because I'm realizing, especially in retrospect, like I may know exactly where whichever character ends up in, you know, wherever down the line. But I don't need to set that up right now, you know? Like, I mean, first of all, I need to get it published regardless. But even in the right now, that is kind of irrelevant because it's not about all of that. You know, they've only just appeared. And in that way, why would the reader care is maybe also a better question to ask. Like, say, I don't know, with like the mechanics of what, because obviously I'm trying to write a weird blend of fantasy and sci-fi at the same time, which kind of sounds like an oxymoron, but you know, I mean, well, whimsy, you know, just have whimsy maybe. Like with that, I find that, you know, even something as simple as like, oh, there's a spaceship. My knee-jerk reaction is to go, okay, the spaceship works exactly like this. The fuel comes from this. You know, blah, blah, blah. It was first invented by this guy 400 years ago. But this is the most important part. Who the hell cares? Who cares is a really, really, really important question to answer. Because usually the logical answer is no one cares. Because that's also not what you're supposed to focus on right now. Like, you know, it's that thing of like, the way that I guess I would sort of look at being a writer, especially now, is you're a bit like a magician in the sense that your entire job is to make people suspend their disbelief. So in that way, you only give them enough to keep their attention hanging. But if you give them too much, they already don't care because they already think that they know how the trick works. So you've lost them. So the goal is always to keep them guessing just enough to get them to get to the next part. And then as you expose more, their feeling becomes one of like, oh, I've made this understanding myself. Like this is how I understand
I've connected the dots.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's the rewarding part of reading a book. And it's really easy to lose that, especially when, you know, say you have something like, I don't know, like a modern example, I guess, would be like Jujutsu Kaisen, right? Like, why was that so captivating to the readers? Because, I mean, I was a weekly reader for like 3 years, man. Like, God, what a ride. But every single time, for example, a new technique was revealed or something worked a little bit differently to how we were used to, it was instantly like, how does this work? And the reward was actually in working out the rules without having to be told and spoon-fed the answers. Because the author, I don't know who it is, but the author, Akutami, they were really good at that because it was this constant guessing game. Like even when a character, say for example, figured out the rules of another one's like magic, that would still then be undercut with a new surprise. You know, I mean, even the main villain of the whole series, Sukuna, well, I guess not main villain, but one of them, his technique kept like not changing, but like just, you know, more rules were added.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get back onto that because I want to ask you about how like multimedia helps you with writing. But before we do that, just on the point about helping people get through the rut of like, you know, like writer's block, for example. What I've learned, right, is like the act of leaving it alone. Yeah, is like such an important act because I feel like hyper fixation on something like that does not help. Yeah, and like we often feel like when we're not writing, it's actually something that's not good, but it's a process of us changing our form because I feel like if you wanted to stay stationary, you could always do that. You could always just keep writing the stuff that you did before and never change and never grow. But you recognizing that actually what I'm doing is not good enough or not what I want to be, I want to change, I want to get better, is what stops you because now you have to figure out a different way to do what you've done before. Yeah. I think that process is difficult for some writers, which is why we go through writer's block. So like I think it's like reframing it. Yeah. Where rather than it being a block, it's almost like it's like a new pathway. It's like you're finding new pathways to actually do this thing that you kind of used to doing.
Yeah.
You know, and then once you begin to do that differently, then you find like, okay, cool. Like when the time comes for you to do something new that you're actually like proud of or happy with, then you'll find it's completely changed from what you had when you did before.
Yeah. But to be honest, what I find with myself especially is that like I actually spend more time in writer's block than I do out of it. But that's also because I'm hyper fixated on trying to make it, perfect, even though I just said all of that. I'm a massive hypocrite.
Oh, yeah.
And one thing that I find really helps me though is actually taking a step backwards and trying to, I guess, like understand the mechanics of how storytelling actually works more. Because if you're stuck, the best thing you can do is just go back to the theory. Like, because at the end of the day, that is your best guide. And obviously when it comes to art, it's a subjective thing. But storytelling does have this really like proven formula.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like physics calculation.
Yeah, it's got a skeleton
calculus,
that you
whatever.
just, you build your stuff around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So all you can do is just arm yourself better with how the bones work. And that might resolve it for you. Like for me, like I was stuck for quite a while in trying to understand and justify to myself why this had to be this way. And the more that I do in terms of learning about the theory, the clearer the picture becomes to me. Like, I mean, imagine like I'm about to finish my second year of my PhD, and I had not once thought of breaking down what I'm doing into a simple 3-act structure. And it was only when I actually really I started reading Into the Woods, and then I really sat down, because I already know what I want it to be about. That was never the concern. Most people, I think, before you sit down to write a novel, know exactly what you want it to be about, or anything really. But how you actually get there in the minutiae of writing chapters makes all of the difference. But doing a 3-act structure forces you to really, really, really carefully look at what you're saying and why you're trying to say it and how it's being said.
I think also one of the ways that we struggle with that is that, and I want to just come on to this point also, and I want to get your opinion on this, is the identity of being a writer. People so much feel like they have to live up to that identity. And I think that's the struggle, there's this idea that I really like, and it's like, it's basically just be careful that the mask that you wear in chase of your dreams doesn't become who you are. It's like, you to be a writer, you have to become this thing, It's like the way you kind of look at the world, the way you kind of look at literature, all of these things. But often you run into the trouble of not finding a balance with who you are and, what you do, and I think, there's a version of you where the dream will serve you, but there's another version where you serve the dream. I think finding that balance is so important. What do you think about the identity of a writer? How do you think we can better, or people should better, kind of relate to that? What is the balance that you think people should strike between, I am a writer, so all I do is write and, staying in a room all day and, the darkness, candle wax, just trying to, find the next plot point, or I am a writer, I go outside, I live life, and I bring that back?
I mean, at the very least for me personally, I have to balance the fact that I have to work. So as horrifying as it might be, I think the solution to most people's problems is fill out a job application maybe. Because, writing or whatever it is that you do, it can't be everything about you. Because also it never was. So you would just be trying to fulfill this bizarre fantasy. That would be entirely predicated on a lie. Even when I certainly had more free time to write or pursue whatever I was doing, allowing it to become my entire default self would have genuinely worked to my detriment, because I think the most important thing you can do really with anything that you do is not to have this fixed outlook of I must be like this, because quite simply you never were. You're literally always changing. Even how I feel about it now has changed. When I was younger, 23 or younger even, and even like when we met in our masters, how old I was, like 22. You know, I certainly had the free time to write more, and I was definitely a lot more taken with it. But at the same time, I feel like I had to grow and change with my life. And you know, like having this expectation of yourself, or like view, I suppose, of yourself as like, oh, I'm just this person. You know, you never were. Like, you're with all things, we're all changing. You know, like seasons change, the waves, the weather. Why not your mind as well? And in that way, like, you know, you can't, especially if you want to make something like art or really anything, like, because everything is kind of ephemeral anyway. Becoming fixed on a specific outlook of it, ironically, becomes a bit more close to, like, you know, that typical phrase people use for old people of like, oh, they're stuck in their ways.
You become stuck in your ways a little bit.
You become stuck in your ways.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah. I think like the way I look at it is like as like a farmer, you know, like it's like you have to have an understanding that this is something you're going to do for a long time.
Yeah.
And a farmer isn't just a farmer. Like they use that as a way to sustain their life.
Yeah.
But their life is sustained. That's the most important thing. So it's like you have to find a balance between. And I think a lot of people in this new day and age have to. I really like struggling with this. It's like this because it's, you know, we talk about it all the time, the hustle culture, the like kind of entertain culture. You have to become a certain type of way, you know, you do this and this. But I think in that you lose the thing that you're doing it for, because obviously at the beginning you're doing it to sustain something within you that you want to be kind of, you know, you think like you need more, you need that validation. So you go chasing that. But like the validation won't come. And if it does, it won't come in equal, like, you know, measurement throughout the whole rest of your life.
Yeah.
You know, you need to find a balance of how you internally feel about your own life.
Yeah.
I think the best way I've found to do that is to just look at it like, you know, it's like you're a farmer. You're just planting seeds and watching them grow. And then, you know, this thing, if it doesn't go well, it's fine. I'll just do it again.
Yeah.
You know, not have this kind of like outcome obsessed viewpoint of it.
Yeah.
Where you actually gain something from actually just doing the act. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But it's also like, you know, I think it's very good to have a sense of purpose for sure. Like, I mean, I think everybody kind of needs something to cling to. But your purpose isn't your whole being. And even then, you know, purpose can be a very multifaceted thing. Like, for me, as much as, you know, wanting to be a writer, especially when I was younger, was like, for me, the be all and end all. To be honest, now I care more about, can I pay rent? That certainly matters. And
so it's that's like a true writer. Just like a true writer would.
Typical brokey, eh?
Typical writer.
Like, but at the same time, I also think, you know, but what matters more to me, to be honest, in the present, more than writing even, which, you know, God, is like, am I a good partner? Like, am I a good person? Like, because I think that those things kind of, like, perhaps in the literal sense, because, you know, they're real, they matter more. But also, like, because I've kind of grown to let go of this need to define myself by, you know, oh, I'm a writer, whatever that's supposed to mean. And now I look at it more as like, yeah, you know, I suppose I am a writer to some extent, at least, you know, to the extent that I'm 30 grand in debt for a PhD now, on top of the rest of my debt. But that's kind of just one small facet of everything I do. Like, in my day-to-day, I do a bunch of other stuff. Like, I'm learning skills I never had before. Like, I'm learning to cook more as well, which I've kind of always enjoyed, but it's fun. You know, I mean, like, but even that, like, the journey with cooking. Like, I started out as a kid, like, I could make mac and cheese. That was it. But now I make all kinds of crap.
Yeah.
Like, and that's fun. You know, that's like literally seeing change and progression in my actual life, and something that I never really thought to even take note of,
Yeah.
like learning to cook.
Yeah.
I think it's obviously an essential skill, but
absolutely. I think the problem comes with this like kind of like identity that we try to kind of like, you know, stay in all the time, you know, because people feel like it's easier, you know, because, you know, we run into the same problem when someone meets you. It's like, what do you do? And it's like, I want to introduce myself as this thing. Oh, I'm a writer. Or I'm a poet. Or I'm a podcaster. But then I'm like, wait, but I also do this. I also do that. I also do that. And it's like, I'm trying to like kind of refine my whole personality, and the more interesting you are, the more you go just different parts of yourself into this one sentence thing so this person can understand you. That's just like a limit of language, I think. That's just like, that's not understanding that.
To be honest, I think it goes beyond just being a limit of language. You're definitely right about it being a limit of language, because obviously, you know, actually on that topic, there was this really good line that I heard in a movie that my partner made me watch. It's called Remarkably Bright Creatures. It's from the perspective of an octopus, and like how the octopus views the strange human foibles around it. And it was something along the lines of like, you know, you have millions of words to express yourselves, and yet communication comes with so much difficulty for you all, which essentially encapsulates what you were saying. Like, you know, we struggle so much with our own language, you know, one that at the very least I grew up natively speaking, and I'm terrible with it. You know, especially when emotions come into the picture, words fly out the window, man. Honestly, it is real hard.
This ape brain doesn't understand how to use language to communicate.
Of course not. But I think as well, like even with, you know, say for example, Gen Z, actually relating that to a thing I read in Into the Woods, the guy who wrote it, John York, I think this was his line anyway, he said that like classic tragedy was loss of life, modern tragedy is loss of purpose. And I think we've conflated as a generation, and perhaps, you know, this is the result of the generations that lord over us and God knows what else, but we're very set on pigeonholing ourselves, you know, like people in our generation in particular, like maybe even just our age group of like late 20s, horrifying.
Don't, just keep going.
Like hate that for us, like, but we're so fixed on pigeonholing ourselves. Like we're so desperate to have like, I am this, I am like this is how I am. There's no room for any vagueness.
How do you think we got here? Why do you think we do that?
The need to define ourselves, you know, maybe it is loss of purpose at the end of the day. Because in the past, even in the past like 50 years, purpose looked very, very, very different. Like, you know, the millennials, I'm sure, can attest to this one more than perhaps anyone else alive right now. But the stereotypical path, at least in the West, of like, you know, go to school, maybe go to uni, get a job, buy a house same year probably, you know, with that fat salary you were making, get married and poop out a bunch of kids. And then the cycle will repeat itself for those kids. Doesn't seem to be happening too easily these days, does it? Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be said about that actually, and that's one of the things I'm really fascinated by, which is like the prolonged life kind of like, you know, of our generation. I'm really interested in that, and I'm trying to find people to talk to about it, because I feel like there's a lack of understanding from our part of how we got here. But I think there's people who study it and they have the understanding of it, economy, kind of like even just like how we set up our home life, you know, our mental health, like all of these different facets of it. But I think, one of it, as we understand, is language, is storytelling. It's the story we tell ourselves about the kind of the lifestyle we're supposed to have, and where we stop it, and like how it kind of defines us. Before we end, I want to move on to another topic. We've talked very kind of broadly about storytelling and kind of purpose and just like, you know, obviously writing. But one thing I really wanted to end on is the understanding of like, you know, you were mentioning before about free will and you know, like kind of determinism, you know, like where we play a role in how we redefine ourselves and where we kind of come into play, how we kind of like define our own story. Talking about that, there's a film that we both watched that I've been waiting so long to talk to someone about this.
Yeah.
Waking Life. And so for those who've not seen it and don't understand it, it's basically this kind of like story which is not really kind of has any plot to it. This character, goes in a dream and he just goes through these different philosophical questions without any answer or resolution, just like asking all these different questions. And one of the questions they ask in a small part of the film, go and watch it, is incredible. It's about free will and determinism. One person says, free will is, something that we don't have. We can't have free will. We're just a bunch of atoms. All of it is kind of determined by, all these things that we do. Another says, no, actually, we have free will because we can determine in the moment our consciousness, our awakened consciousness is what we kind of like understand about that. First, what did you think of the movie? But also, what do you think about that kind of specific problem?
That is genuinely one of my favorite movies. Like, it's just really, really, really good. And it's one of those films that you could watch it 10 times and every single time find something more interesting within it. Like, one of my favorite parts in it is that, like, taking from like the free will and determinism side, the opening scene of that child where, they're doing like the pick a number, pick a color thing. It's like dreams is destiny. And then the kid just starts like floating away, but he grabs the car handle. And then at the end of the film, the perspective gets flipped again and the guy just floats away without really trying to grab the car handle. To me, that is free will basically taking over at the end of it. I feel like for me, a very personal crisis, as I'm sure most people was like when I was a teenager, I think. I got really, really, really stuck in feeling like there was no free will and that life was determined already for me. And that everything I was doing was basically just selecting from a group of predetermined outcomes. But they all have the same destination anyway, you die. Obviously, you learn to let go of that, or in the case of, I think, most people, just simply not really think about it. And then we get really, really, really good at not thinking about it. But like I genuinely, I'm a big believer in free will. A big believer in free will. I think like there are predetermined, outcomes to an extent, but I still genuinely believe that free will stems entirely from your ability to understand yourself and your present. Because, of course everything feels determined at the outset if you don't really understand yourself. And I think like a lot of the film was really trying to get on that more than anything else. Which is also, I suppose, maybe the reason why it took place in the main character's subconscious. Is because it's him delving into his own mind to find answers about the direction of his own life. Yeah,
and the fact that it was lucid dreaming, it was like him trying to like figure out through his own dreams what he understood, and him slowly coming to realization that he was in a dream. That kind of at the beginning he was not really lucid. I think that kind of coming to be awake. I think that kind of that mimics to me the kind of the human experience of like we start in Plato's cave, in the dark, and as light comes in and we start to become more awake, more understand, what Buddha did about just all these things that are determined around us. That's when you become free and you gain free will because you start to see your place in it and you start to understand that it's all kind of transient. And once you start to understand the world is transient, you make sense of your own internal, I guess, waves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even like, I suppose the phrase sleepwalking through life, right?
Yeah.
That's a very deterministic thing to say. Even I think the nature of like, particularly in the film, of like the nature of dreaming, right? That is something that at the outset suggests that you lack free will over it. And the lucid part is that obviously, now you're suddenly able to exhibit free will over your subconscious. But you can also really clearly see that at the very least in the film, he has no control over where his dreams are taking him. He's just being dragged along. It's like that bit with the boat car where, he's just in some guy's boat.
Yeah, and he's like where should we get off? It's like, wherever.
Yeah. And somebody else has to decide for him. It's that lack of willingness as well, perhaps, to even, exhibit some kind of control over your life because you're scared of the outcome. I'm in a PhD right now, and to be honest, I have no idea what the outcome is going to be. I very well might turn around at the end of it and just go, actually, don't want to be an academic. I'm just going to go open a cafe.
That's a very good point, actually. talking about, you know, being taken by these dreams and being scared of the outcome. I feel a lot of our generation is feeling that, you know, feeling like you can make a decision when they were in school and now they have to kind of follow through it, and they're being taken on this path and they're really not sure where it's going to end. How do you come to terms with that?
Well, I mean, personally, I'm a control freak. That's why I'm writing a book, because, you know, I need to tell myself I have some control in this life. I just have to exhibit control over fake people. But it's also just easier when you make it up, you know? Like,
and also, it's not really made up. It's,
well,
you know,
I suppose
stories,
technically not, but
stories are not made up.
Yeah, well,
they're very, very
I
intrinsic.
wish it could be real too. You know, I wish One Piece could be real, but at the same time, like, I think, you know, like, you need to feel like you're in control in some ways, right? Like, for me, it entirely stems from, like, all of the control I feel I need from my life stems from the fact that I've put myself in this position where I can write what I want to write, and I know what I want to say, and that gives me the feeling of control I need, because it for me, it's sort of like the rudder for my boat. Like, being able to write and knowing that I'm trying to make it go somewhere gives me that feeling, that tiny feeling that I am in control of my own, you know, destiny. Because I feel like that's a choice that I actively make. You know, no one's telling me to do this, other than, I suppose, my dad and my PhD supervisor. But they can't make me do it, you know? Like, it's up to me at the end of the day. And that, for me, gives me this feeling of like, oh, I do have agency here. Because I can just throw in the towel whenever I want. But I'm not going to do that. Because that would be like giving up my control.
So how would you suggest other people find that kind of agency then? Is it to take on a meaningful task that they feel like they do it because they want to do it, but also it has a reward for them that they think is worthy of the time?
Well, I mean, the reward can be whatever you want it to be. You know, like, for me, by the end of it, worth my time, I don't really care. Like, even if it doesn't make me rich, it's not really my concern. It's simply knowing that I saw that thing through to the end. Like, all of the points I wanted to raise, because these are just things I think about anyway, did find their answers. And as long as I can achieve that, then I'm happy with it, even if it quite literally never sees the light of day. I'm okay with that, because I would know that at the very least, hopefully, by the end of it, I would have resolved whatever questions it is that I'm trying to ask myself.
And I love that too, because I feel like that, coming back to Waking Life, that's a large part of that movie, is the questions that we ask ourselves, and in the pursuit of trying to answer those questions, the life that we live. I've come to terms with that, like, a bit now, where, you know, the first distinctive memory I have of me kind of beginning this path is understanding that I am going to die, memento mori, and that not actually making me depressed, but giving me a sort of freedom, as of like, oh, that is the only determinism that we have, the fact that we are going to die. In between that, you know, we have so much ability to, you know, the will that you have can change, you know, actual mass and actual kind of form and make into what you want. And I've experienced that in my life. You know, you just have to get through the, you know, the sludge of doing it. You know, you push up against reality, but you have your will and you have reality. And if you move through it in a, you know, in a way which is honest to yourself, and you're kind of able to deal with what comes at you, then you actually make headway. And I think that's the only way I've realized not to be sleepwalking, because a lot of people are sleepwalking, and it's only going to get worse, and it becomes worse and worse to be sleepwalking, because, like, you know, this life that we live, you know, is controlled by all these different things. But I think, we have to find some way to kind of like push up against that.
It can also be anything, is the thing. I think that's also ironically what makes it really hard, is that, like, we're not looking for something as, you know, it feels a bit like when your mum calls you, like, you know, handsome or whatever. You don't believe it. It feels different coming from somebody else, I suppose. In that way, like, unfortunately, one thing that I continuously struggle with in my life is that, simply put, there is no right way to live. There is no right way to live. Like, in my own head, I'm actually not living the right way, because, you know, I'm in my PhD. But then obviously that raises a separate question of, well, what the hell is the right way then? Having, like, you know, a 9 to 5, is that the right way? Like, but then you ask people in a 9 to 5 and they'd be like, no,
Yeah.
Actually, no.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Exactly. I feel like all of us have to find a path that makes sense to ourselves then.
That's exactly it. Like it's finding a path that makes sense for you. Obviously, there are things we quite literally need to do versus want to do, which I guess goes back to that whole story thing again. We all have to work to live. We all have to work to live. Does not mean you have to live to work, but you need to pay rent or your mortgage or whatever. Like that, unfortunately, has to happen. You know, you have to feed yourself. You have to. You know, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that pyramid.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that your things are accounted for. You know, like your affairs are in order. Your life, to the extent that you're able to manage, is, you know, in order enough for you to feel comfortable. And for most of us, that's already asking too much. But if you manage to achieve that, it then becomes a question of like, okay, well, that's when things like purpose can really enter the frame. Like, you know, I think I've kind of approached it in a bit like backwards, in the sense that I kind of perhaps arbitrarily decided my purpose as a child, which was just that I wanted to write. But then, you know, none of my affairs were in order. And like even now, I think it's getting there for sure. But, you know, I'm not following what is necessarily, I suppose, like the typical road.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you're also not.
Exactly.
Like,
and I think that there's a little freedom in that too.
Yeah,
you know?
of course.
Yeah. Final
but that's
question.
the thing, is like it doesn't make you wrong. And that's the hard part, is that for people, especially when it comes to purpose, is that they don't want to be wrong. Like, people are scared to invest so much of themselves in something only for it to not really manifest in a way that matters to them. But that's kind of approaching it the wrong way. Like, it's the doing it is supposed to be the thing that matters to you. It's not the result. But it's really hard to retain that. And also, I'm 26, so somebody who's 35 very well might not get anything out of that advice. You know, I don't know. We're all different.
I was going to say, final question. What gives you hope? You know, there's a lot of things going on in the world right now, and I think it's very easy to be despairing about everything that happens. You know, we're learning all this new information, but I think, like we spoke about today, a lot of it is a story we tell ourselves. A lot of it is how we structure that story, that 5-act story we're all going through. What gives you hope, and what can you say that's hopeful to not just yourself, but also to the wider world at large?
What gives me hope?
Yeah.
The fact that I don't have social media.
That's not
You'd
helpful.
be amazed how helpful that can be. But God, I don't know. I mean, because also, like, especially in the last few years, you know, really been through the ringer a bit. But what gives me hope, ironically, is the thing I was just talking about. It's my personal feeling of purpose. Like, I feel so driven to want to do what I'm doing. But it's also so easy to lose that purpose or that hope. You know, like when I'm stuck in a rut, it disappears into the shadows very, very quickly. And then I'm left feeling like I have no purpose, or no hope even. I think, like, what gives people hope, or what gives me hope? I would say the belief in a better tomorrow, but I don't. So
I think to answer that question for myself, then I think that a lot of what we said is the purpose part, right?
Yeah.
I think it's like, I think life is such a up and down thing. You're always going to have moments of down, moments of up. And to really, like, that's an unfair question, actually, because to ask someone what gives you hope is almost like negating the negatives.
Yeah.
That, like, oh yeah, like, no matter what happens, I'm still going to have hope. And that's not how life works. But I think for me, understanding that, you know, the transient nature of life, and like, you know, I think, like, looking at life as a story, like you were saying, like, you know, the 5-act story, that maybe you're now going through that moment of like internal turmoil, and, you know, and maybe you're at this precipice of like a decision there. Are you going to go back home? You're going to go forwards, you know, that kind of like the journey that we are going to, you know, the hero's journey, you know, where are you in that hero's journey? I think for me, what gives me hope is understanding that the more I've kind of like looked into storytelling, and like looked into like how other great people that I'm trying to be like, how their stories follow that kind of path, I go, oh, okay, like, there's no need for me to be so anxious about this moment that I'm in.
Yeah.
Like, it will pass. And if it doesn't pass, that's part of the development. You know, I think, like, using stories and using movies as a way for me to kind of, like, you know, understand my current moment has really been helpful. And it might not give me hope. That might be a bit wrong way to kind of phrase that, but it does give me understanding about, like, my current situation.
Yeah. I think that's good.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, obviously, I was messing with you. Like, I do actually believe in a better tomorrow. I hope so anyway.
Yes, and we have to. We're going to be around tomorrow.
Yeah, God help us.
Oh, if we're not, then yeah, we're right.
But I also think, like, genuinely, like, for me, what gives me hope is the feeling that you can let go. Like, maybe that's annoyingly vague, much like the concept of hope is, but definitely just, you know, feeling like when I say let go, I basically mean, you know, inner peace. But in the sense of, like, you know, obviously my life matters to me. You know, the conclusion of my life hopefully will not be terrible or painful. That would be worse. But it's also that knowledge of, like, it's like, when I say let go, I mean, like, just let go of yourself, the individual, and picture it more like a story in that way. That's what gives me hope. Like, I'll be dead and gone, you know, maybe in 80 years. Maybe tomorrow I'll get hit by a bus or something. Hopefully not drown. That's, like, big fear of mine. But, you know, it's the hope, I suppose, that, like, whatever it is that I leave behind, or whatever anyone leaves behind, really, it all kind of just adds up to this wider framework of, you know, only the story of the entire human race, the oldest and sometimes most boring story ever told. And certainly most frustrating, my God. But
I don't know if it's ever boring. I think it's always a bit too exciting.
Yeah, well, but that's what makes it endearing,
Yeah.
you know? Like, we only have ourselves to compare to and also to blame.
Yeah.
But that's what makes it so compelling, is that, like, as much as there's this very, like, misanthropic kind of undercurrent to seemingly everything right now, the story of humans is an underdog story, you know? Like, we are constantly fighting to justify ourselves to ourselves and only the entire unfeeling cold universe.
That's a fantastic way to end, I think.
Well, we want it to be exciting, you know?
Yes,
Like,
that's a fantastic way to end. I think, yeah, I agree. And I think, yeah, a lot of what you said today might help someone a little bit to deal with the...
if they can figure out the sense and all the nonsense I was saying, sure, yeah, because I don't know what the hell I was talking about.
You were saying some amazing stuff, as always. Thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm happy
Kieran.
to be here, man.
I'll see you. Thank you. Thanks for your time. And thank you for watching. Until next time, peace.
Pay his Patreon.
But yes,
Yeah.
please do.
Yeah.
Give me
Plug
some
the
money.
Patreon. Plug the
I don't
Patreon.
have one, but I will
Make a
have.
Patreon then.
That is true.
please.
This is going to stay in, actually.
Yeah.